Hi. Right. My name's G, as Bobby said. What I do is I call myself a storyteller. You know, when we look at things around diversity and stuff like that, I think a lot of the time we focus on what we need to do and how we need to do it, but we forget about the why, if that makes sense. You know, the why hasn't really, to me, become clear for everyone. And I think the why is tied to the stories that we tell. So what I do, I use stories to get people thinking, if that makes sense. Yep. So what I'm going to do is just give you a brief snapshot in the small time that we've got of what I do and who I am. And then we'll take it from there. Happy with that? Like you've got a choice. Right, so transformational impact of stories and habits. That's me, G. What I'm going to do is tell a bit about my story, and then as we go through, you'll probably get why. Yep. My parents came over here in the 1950s. My father was from Nigeria. My mother was from Jamaica. They met in, well, they both ended up living in Notting Hill in London. And there was a killing of a young black guy in London called Kelso Cochrane in the late 1950s. And it was very similar circumstances to Stephen Lawrence when he was killed. And it created a bit of an issue in the black community, and they decided to have a protest. And when my parents came over, my mother came over, was invited over by Enoch Powell, believe it or not. Right? Bit of an interesting thing. He went over there to recruit for the NHS and London Transport. And my dad came over to work on London Transport. They both went on this protest, and they met on this protest, and something wonderful happened. They fell in love. And they sort of were dating for a while, and then my mum got pregnant, and they started to look for somewhere to live. And back then, in the early 60s, a lot of the places they went to didn't want a pregnant black woman living in their house. So they had to struggle to find somewhere to live. They then found a room, and the landlord said to them, you can stay here until the baby's born. Once the baby's born, I want you out of here. They didn't want to lose the place they had. So when I was born, you know, those days were 7 days in hospital. They sent me to live with a white foster family in a little village in Kent. And for the first 8 years of my life, I lived in this little village in Kent with a white foster family. And you know, you have those things as a child that start to form who you are. I was the only black kid in this village. The beauty of it was, I hardly ever had dinner at home because everybody wanted me around the house. The other side of it was, we had a working man's club in the village. And my job on a Friday night was to sit next to the one-armed bandit. So people would come up, rub the head of the jigaboo before they put their money in the machine. Right? That was my job, so to speak. People took this not only to the working man's club, as I walked around the village, people would just come up and rub my head for luck. Right? That's the kind of life I was growing up with. Cowboys and Indians. Guess who the Indian always was? I remember going to the teacher one day and saying, I want to be a cowboy, and the teacher says, oh bless, you're the wrong colour. Right? So very quickly I'm getting a sense of where I belong. When you watch TV back in those days, you know, Cowboy in Africa, Tarzan, what were black people in those things? You know, sort of savages, weren't they? I was beginning to feel that I was lucky to be living in this little village in Kent. And that was pretty much my life. It was a good life. Until, you know, that was the village. I got to about 8 years old, came home from school, sitting on the sofa was a big black man. This was the first time I've physically seen a black person apart from myself. And next to him was my suitcase. And my foster mother said, this is your real father, he's come to take you home for the holiday. I'm sitting there thinking, man, you're my mommy and daddy, I have no idea who this guy is. And you know, you have those moments when you grow up and they stick in your mind. One of the things, sorry, I do sweat a lot if you don't mind. If you don't mind, like I need your permission. We got on the train from Canterbury to London, and my dad did not say one word to me. We sat on this, bearing this in mind, this is the first time he's seen his son since he was born. And we got to Victoria. I had never been to London. I'd never been to a big city. I got off the train and it was just chaos everywhere. And I remember wetting myself. And my dad beat the crap out of me there and then on the platform. And that became the foundation of our relationship for the next 8 years. My dad physically abused me for the next 8 years. We grew up in the village, we had the local Bobby. Everybody knew the local Bobby. When I came to London, I remember sitting down in the living room and everybody used to talk about the police were doing this and the police were doing that and how racist the police were. I didn't have any of that framework to hang that on. It didn't make sense to me. Until one day I was walking to school with a little guy called Eugene, Irish lad, and there was a police officer walking up ahead of us. And I ran up, Eugene ran up to him first and said, "Hello, Mr. Policeman." And he goes, "Hello," and he gives him a coin. So I thought, oh, the police are giving away money. So I ran up to get my share, ran up to this officer, said, "Hello, Mr. Policeman." And he turned around to me and he said, "Fuck off, you little black bastard." In that moment, everything I'd heard in the living room became true. I went from being this good kid to becoming this angry kid. Plus with the stuff that was going on, I just became a problem. This was the world I was growing up in at that time. You had your racism, your National Front, the scrap, anybody remember? Not the TSG, what were they called back then? SPG. Anybody heard of the SPG? Special Patrol Group. We were terrified of all of those guys, right? But we did have Trevor McDonald. And that was, I remember the first time Trevor McDonald came on TV, we all sat around the TV, like, "Oh my God, there's a black guy on TV. Doesn't he speak funny?" So that was the world I was growing up in. I was a very angry kid. A lot of the early riots, or we called them uprisings as kids, in Notting Hill and places like that, I was there. I was one of those ones throwing bricks at the police and stuff like that. I don't know how I never got arrested. My dad saw me as becoming a bit of a handful. Basically, there was so much going on inside my head. I was a young kid, I didn't know how to make sense of the world. But what he did do, he had a stroke in 1978. And to me, that was the best thing that ever happened. Because in that stroke, he couldn't hit me. And I remember the summer of that 78, he allowed me to do whatever I wanted. It was a great summer. And then it got to about September and he sat me down and he said, "I need you to do me a favor." And I said, "Okay." He goes, "I can't travel because I've had a stroke. So I need you to go to Nigeria for me and go and spend some time with your relatives because they're having a big family reunion. Would you do that for me? Would you be a man for me?" You know, when you're a 15, 16-year-old kid, hearing those words, "be a man," has a very powerful impact. I'm sort of like, yeah, I'll go. And I got to Nigeria, arrived in Lagos, sitting there, staying at my uncle's place. After about 5 or 6 weeks, I said, "When am I going back?" And my uncle said, "You're not going back. Your father doesn't want you back. You're staying here in Nigeria." And then about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was woken up, taken out on the back of a lorry full of yams. Anybody know what yams are? Like potatoes. Taken out into this darkness for about 4 or 5 hours on this trip. And I was taken to this village in the middle of nowhere. And they took me to this village because they had a fear that I would escape and come back to London. In this village, hardly anybody spoke English. Good. What I put in front there? There was no running water, no electricity. I'm a 16-year-old kid from London, suddenly in the middle of all of this chaos, or this confusion. I was there for about a year, and I managed to scrape some money together and escape from this village and went back to Lagos. Lagos is not the kind of place where you can pick up a tube map, right, or an A to Z. I arrived in Lagos and I'm walking around thinking, well, okay, I'm here, but I have no idea where I'm going to go. And I remember walking around the whole day till I came to this bridge, and there were a load of people sleeping under the bridge. And I thought, well, there's nowhere else for me to go. And I went and I slept with them. That became my home for the next year and a half. Sleeping under that bridge every night, there's 50, 60 people sleeping under that bridge. I saw people raped, I saw people murdered, woke up next to dead bodies. That was the life. There was no one, we were nobody. We were seen as the lowlifes in that place. The way we sort of survived is you woke up every morning, you know, get out your bed, as you do, went down, had a little wash by the stream, and then we had to rush down to the rubbish dump where they dumped the overnight food. And we had to get there before the wild dogs got there so we could get the best portions of food. After getting that, we would then go to clubs, bars and things and tell jokes and do routines. because I was from England, I had a nice stock of jokes and I had an accent. The hardest part about being under that bridge wasn't all of that. All of them were Nigerians. And they used to say things to me like, hang on, wait, we're Nigerian, we were born here. You're clearly from England. Your parents are letting you live like this, why? You know, and I didn't know how to deal with that. So I would tell people that my parents and my family died in a car crash and I was an orphan, because that's the only way I could cope with living under that place. And then one day I went into one of the bars doing one of my routines, and fate would have it that one of my uncles was there. And he saw me, looked at me, was shocked, took me in, got me cleaned up, and got me a job as a trainee welder in a steel plant, where I met this gentleman here, who was an English guy amongst a load of Germans. You're getting a very short version of a much wider story. So some of you, I don't know if any of you have heard the story before. Yeah, you have, yeah. So you know. He basically took me under his wing. He was the only English guy amongst a load of Germans. So he took me under his wing, sort of helped me out. And then his wife came over on holiday, and at the end of her stay, they had a little party. And I'm sitting in the party, and she says, "What are you doing here? You don't belong here. You should be back in England. Why don't you go back to England?" I'd been in Nigeria about 7 years by this time. And I said, "Well, where am I going to get the money?" I was earning £25 a month. The fare was £600. So Richard said, "Where's your passport?" I said, "I have no idea. My uncle took it off me years ago." So he said, "So it's lost." He said, "But where were you born?" I said, "I was born in London." He goes, "But you're entitled to a British passport." My father had told me I wasn't. So you kind of believe that. And then when his wife got back, got a passport form, got my birth certificate, within a few weeks, or about a month or so, I get a new British passport. And Richard says, "I'm going to hold on to this because I don't want you to lose it." I thought, okay. A couple of weeks later, we're sitting there talking in his house, and he bends down and goes, "Oh, by the way," throws an envelope across the table. He goes, "That's yours." And I sort of open up this envelope. Inside this envelope is my passport and a first-class ticket back to London. And he said to me, "You mustn't ask me why." Well, hey, I can live with that. So in 1987, I found myself leaving this place and getting on a plane and coming back to the good old UK. This was 8 years after I had left. I came back. Where was the one place I wasn't going to go? To your dad's. Outside that, I had no idea where I was going to go. All I had to my name was 2 pairs of trousers, a shirt, a towel, and then Richard had given me £50. Right? So I went round to see if any of my old school friends were still around. They've all moved on. Right? I went to a youth club I used to go to as a kid, which has now turned into a bar. And I walked in and I asked about the guy who used to run the youth club. And they said, "Oh, he's still around, he's retired, but occasionally he pops in for a drink." So I thought, okay, I'll sit down and hope that today's one of those days. And out of all the kids he's seen, he's got to remember me. Right? And I sat down and somebody walks in, literally walks past me, stops. And he goes, "Gee." And I remember jumping up, knocking over the table, grabbing this person, hugging them. And then I said, "Who are you?" And it turned out to be one of my old classmates from school. "Where are you staying?" "I don't know." Took me around to his house for dinner. He was a warden for a mental rehabilitation unit. This was the days, thank you, welcome. This was the days when care in the community was coming in. And this was a home that was helping people from institutions get back into life. And he said, "Look, if you pretend to have mental health issues, I can get you in there as a temporary patient." Okay, I've got nowhere else to go. First night I was in there, put all my stuff in my room and I thought, I'll have a shower. And then I noticed none of the doors had any locks. Okay, no problem, adult world. I'm in the shower, having this shower. The door opens, this big guy walks in, drops his trousers and sits on the toilet. And I'm sort of like, "Hello?" And he looks at me and he goes, "You're new here. What's your name?" And I thought, shit. Through this person, I got somewhere else to stay. And I ended up working in a shopping centre in London, Brent Cross, where we used to catch the shoplifters, and all the cops said, "You should join the job. Right? You'll be a good copper, you should join." So in 1992, I applied and I joined. Now, who's the police officer in this room? Why did you join? So all the things we haven't got anymore.
Well, it was to serve the public as well.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-mm. None of that made a difference to me. In my mind at that time, every experience I had had of being black, to me, had been negative. I wanted to be white. If somebody had come to me and said, take this tablet, it will make you white, I would have taken it without question. I wanted that warrant card to say, I'm one of you, I'm not one of them. Does that make sense? When I joined at Hendon. First couple of weeks in Hendon, there was a knock at my door. And it was about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And these guys burst into my room and said, you're the wrong color to be in this job. And they held me down and made me the right color. And then we took a picture. Now, if you look at that picture, what do you notice about my face, apart from the color? Why would I be smiling? Precisely. I saw that as acceptance. They like me. When I got to the first station I was at, for the first couple of years, I was the only black officer at this station. But I was also the guy that told all the racist jokes in the canteen. I was also the guy that went out of my way to stop and harass and search black people. So I could tell people, I'm not one of them, I'm one of you. I was responsible back then for reinforcing people's prejudices. Because people would ask me about stuff and I would say, well, tell you exactly what you wanted to hear. And that came back to bite, that has come back to bite me on a number of occasions. All the time I'm going through this, I became like a poster boy for the Met. Right? If they had a film star come up, who did they wheel out? Me. Because I make him look good, apparently. Tony Blair, campaigns, articles in the media. I was everywhere. It was almost like someone says, no, if G's on duty, just check the Job magazine. They'll find him there. At one point, I was in the job the job is a Met magazine. I was in the job more times than the commissioner. Where was John Stevens at the time. But while I was going through all this, internally, I wasn't happy. I was the guy who would go out and buy drinks for everybody the whole night. I don't do that anymore, by the way. Just for the record. Buy drinks for everybody the whole night. I remember taking out a loan of 15 grand where I took 4 of my colleagues on a weekend trip to New York. We stayed at the Waldorf Astoria, hired a limousine, blew the lot, because I wanted them to tell everybody I was such a nice guy. Right? That was the kind of mindset I was having at the time. I was eventually selected for a great job, and it was the first positive action team set up in the country. And I was selected to work on this team. It was just after the release of the Stephen Lawrence report. Joined this team, and it was about the recruitment, retention, and development of minority groups. Got to this team, great team to work. And for me, those 8 hours at work were the best 8 hours I had. Outside work, my life was crap. It was just completely falling to bits. I am part Nigerian. You've heard some of the things people say about Nigerians. I heard those in the canteen. And as a result, I distanced myself from my Nigerian relatives and friends because I didn't want those people in the canteen to think I had anything to do with that group they were slagging off. You with me? I remember one guy once asked me, you got credit cards on you? I said, yeah. Can we just show us so we know they're all in your name? Right? And I showed him willingly. So that was the kind of world I was living in. Got to a point where all this stuff starts to build up inside you. It starts to eat away inside you. And it got to a point where I started to feel really depressed. Started to drink heavily. And I remember one night waking up about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was about 60 grand in debt. My life was just crap. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was going on. And I sat down and I wrote a suicide note and decided I was going to kill myself. I then went to the local train station where I stood on the platform waiting for the fast train. And in case you're wondering, I didn't commit suicide. But I ended up at my desk, and I ended up having a breakdown where I was off work for about 3 months. During that breakdown, I was asked 2 questions that had a profound impact on my life. And the first question was, somebody said, who defines you? I was coming up to my 40s. I was a young black kid, or old man then by then. Nobody had ever said to me, you can define yourself. I didn't even know what that meant. I thought I had to be what everybody else wanted me to be. That was a real mind puzzler for me. Worked it through. The second question the guy asked me was, why did you allow people to intimidate you? I wanted to sit in that place of, it's not me, it's you lot. If you lot understood me, I wouldn't have an issue. And it made me look in the mirror and see myself as a victim. And looking in the mirror and seeing yourself as a victim is not a very comfortable place to be. But once you cross that path, it transforms everything. And the counselor who I was working with, after about 3 months of training, sat down and said, we're in a park, he said, look, my job is to get people back to work. He said, I'm going to be honest with you, G, I don't think you should come back to the police. I think you should move on and do something else, because I think the police will destroy you. He said, that's my decision, but it's up to you. And he left me in the park, my goodwill hunting moment. Sat in this park for a good few hours and decided, I want to come back, because I like being a cop. I like the job, I like the role, I like what we do for the public. There are people within the job who are a bit of a pain, but the actual profession itself is something that I'm proud of. And I came back and I thought I could bring something back. And I became one of the first, well, at the time, the only black diversity trainer in the Met, which was a very interesting time. Worked through that. Ever since then I got to a stage where there's something else I wanted to work out. So I had to do this. Oh, this is the fastest I've ever done this.
Gamal Turawa, I know him as G. He's one of the most inspiring people I've met in a long time. Please give a big round of applause to G.
It's taken me 40 years, but I'm here. 40 years of hiding, and I've come out. I told my mum I was going to buy a pint of milk. As I stand here, I feel proud to be here, proud to stand in front of all of you, proud to say that I'm black, I'm gay, but more importantly, I'm a human being. I'm a man! And I thought when I was asked to do this, what do I want to say? And I want to speak for all the people that can't be here. All the people that are scared to be here. All the people that are living in fear, that haven't come to terms with their sexuality. And I think the best way for me to do that is in a poem. Can I read a poem to you? I love you guys. This is a rush, man. Black, gay, and a cop. Yeah, I can stand solid as a rock. How I wonder do I do it? Why do I put myself through it? But I now know the challenge, and I can plainly see, is to show the world that I am, I can, and I will be me. And in that, I hope to give others strength, even if it's just 1/10. So I say to those with their heads held down, as if with boulders on their backs are bound, I say you should hold your heads up proudly high, and see the beauty of the sun, the stars, the moon, and the deep blue sky. It's there for you, and not just for others, because we all come from the wombs of our mothers. Sometimes for this strength you may pay a price, because people with fear of themselves will to you not be nice. But those that really understand will offer true friendship with an outstretched hand. And the point you really have to see is that you need to say to the world, I am, I can, and I will be me. Know your heart and know your soul. Know how you really feel, so that you can define yourself. And you, to you, can be real. It's about us, people. No!
I remember getting an email from a friend after I did that. He said, most people come out to their parents and their family. You did it on the BBC. When I did that, obviously, a proud moment, but I didn't realize at the time I became Britain's first openly gay black police officer, which was like, I suddenly became a lobby. I became friends with people like Labby Sifri and Ian McKellen, etc. Paul, what's his name? Anyway, all these different people. It was a long time ago. One of the things about it, though, it was a big turning point. And as a result of that, I started to meet loads of people, get out. My life just totally changed. Totally changed. I have done things in the last 10 years that I would never dream I would do. I met people. In fact, just last night, I came back from teaching a diversity course in Vienna. And I just spent a week out there. So I'm a bit shattered today. Not jet lagged, but if I never see another schnitzel in my life. Again, loads of people that I've taught. To me, the interesting thing is, I have been out and I've taught so many people from different places, different forces, different countries. The one place I've never really got the recognition is the force I work with. And I've always wondered about that. That make sense? Or do you understand what I'm saying? I thought that's kind of interesting. Anyway, I would like to say, and this is the part where you guys come in, right? I would like to say I did all this by myself because I have a strength of character, I have a spirit, and I have a will. I didn't. These are just some of the people that were there for me along the way, that supported me. Some of them were managers, some of them were police officers, some of them weren't. But there were people that were there and supported me. If you go back and there's staff in your team and you ask them who has made a difference in their life or their career or their profession, would your name be on their list? Would your name be on their list? Because of these people and loads more, I stand here today. I was at this conference last week, and on the first day I showed the video of me coming out, and there was a woman from Greece, and she says, I don't understand why you have to tell people you're gay. Huh? I said, because I can. She goes, yeah, but why? It's your bedroom, it's nothing to do with us. And I said, what you don't get is I live in a country where I can say that. I've had people, I know of people who have been killed for being gay. I know of people that live in countries that if they mention that they're gay, they get life imprisonment, which I think is kind of ironic because we'll put you in prison with a bunch of men for the rest of your life. And all this sort of stuff. So when I stand up and I do a lot of this stuff, I'm doing it for the people that can't. And for me, when I look at diversity, and I look at, it's not about the policies, the practices, and the processes. It's about how we deal with people, how we listen to people, how we engage with people. Every single one of us in this room has stories that have shaped us and made us who we are. If you've got kids, the first time they walked, the first time they rode a bicycle, memories you might have with your parents, all of these things shape us. And to me, that's the appreciation. When I do workshops, it's getting people to have a deeper appreciation of that. Because once you have a deeper appreciation of that, you start to do things differently. Because the why becomes so much clearer. Right, I can see you standing up at the back. I won't show this now. But what I'll do is give you a time to ask a few questions. Or make a few comments, or say something, please.
What was the reaction after you came out of the TV in your immediate environment when you got back? You say you've never been recognised in?
Yeah. I think the team I was working on immediately, the immediate team, they were so supportive. My family disowned me. If not for the people I was working with at that time, I don't know how I would have coped. Right? But also the other thing that flicked for me was I didn't care what people thought about it. It wasn't your issue. So if you don't like me because of this, that, or the other, that's not my problem, that's yours. And that was the big switch that changed in my head. That, your ignorance is not I don't have to be defined by, not your ignorance, but you know what I mean. Yeah? Your lack of understanding doesn't have to define me. I remember when Obama and in America, when they had the gay marriage, right? And I was getting, because I do a lot of online stuff, I was getting a lot of hate messages and stuff like that from Christian groups and stuff like that. And I said, the mistake you make is that you feel I need your validation. And I don't. So that was a big change for me, and the support I've got. And I think the fact that I'm standing here is support. Can I just add another thing as well? Take the word understand out of your vocabulary. Right? I think that word creates more problems than it does solving problems. You will never understand what it's like to be me. No matter how much I tell you, you'll never understand. What you can do is appreciate I have a different perspective on life from you. You'll never understand. And I think a lot of the times, I hear it so many arguments and so many debates, you need to understand. No, you don't. Right? You need to appreciate. Appreciate the difference, accept the difference, and acknowledge the difference. Does that make sense? And I think when you look at it from that perspective, it looks a lot easier to deal with. And it's not just about color, race, it's about just that person sitting in front of you has a completely different perspective to you. I'll bring it together now. Yeah. When I do this, I always like to leave with a bit of laughter, just to end the session. So I just tell a couple of stories just to end the session. We all leave with a bit, feel a bit lighter. And I remember years ago, I was working on Notting Hill. And I used to smoke back in those days. And I was standing outside one of the marquees down at the school having a cigarette. And this superintendent walks out, looks at me, and he says, "You look just like Mr. T from the A-Team." I said, "No, I don't." He goes, "Yes, you do. You look just like Mr. T." I said, "I don't." He goes, "You do. Wait there." And I'm like, okay. So he walks in, comes out a few minutes later, about 6 officers, and says to them, "Which member of the A-Team does he look like?" Last one I'll tell, which everyone sort of likes, is when I was applying to join the job, I was put in touch with this black DS who was to mentor me through the whole process. He was like my go-to friend sort of thing. And when I eventually joined, he disappeared, just vanished, don't know where he went. And years later, I was teaching down at Hendon, and I'd come out and done all that. And I'm going into my local supermarket, and he's walking out. And we just sort of bumped in. Wow, haven't seen you for ages. What happened? He said, oh, I joined the regional crime squad, and then from there I retired. I said, oh, wow, you know, how's things going? And he says, oh, my daughter's in the job now. I said, oh, yeah. He goes, yeah, she's down at Hendon going through her training. I said, oh, you must be so proud. He says, yeah. He says, but I can't believe what they're doing down there nowadays. I said, what? She goes, they've only done that bloody diversity week, haven't they? I said, oh, yeah. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, you never guess what? He said, they've only got some bloody black poof teaching diversity down there. No. And he goes, yeah. And he goes into this rant about, you know, the world, what's the world coming to, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm just waiting for one question. Right? And he gets to it and he goes, so, what are you doing nowadays? So I said, I teach diversity down at Hendon. And it was like 5, 4, 3, and I forgot the milk. He just ran off. Diversity doesn't have to be a heavy subject. To me, the best lesson I've learned is it's actually about taking the time to talk and listen. Right? We have to have that engagement. Otherwise, all we're doing is sitting in the place of assumptions. And what changes us is stories. If there's anything in my story that's made you think, imagine how many other stories there are out there that are waiting to be heard, including your own. Yeah. So please, thank you for coming in. Thank you for attending. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll see you at dinner.